district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back, now all of a sudden they don't make any sense? Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be trading. And I always be trading. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them. Fish.
What is up, Fantasyland? Welcome to the GOAT District Weekly Playbook. I'm JD, the GOAT District. Dan, I almost said I'm JD, the GOAT District. I'm JD, the draft room baller. I've got my man, Dan. That's how excited I am for week one, Dan. And you know, going into week two, we got a ton to talk about. I got my man, Dan Williamson, the overhyped sleeper, no E on the end, right beside me. And we're here to bring you a playbook week to week. We're going to be here every Tuesday evening. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. What's up, Jamie? Appreciate you joining the chat tonight. If you're in the chat tonight, you got questions, you got comments, make sure you throw them in there. Dan, straight off the plane from Vegas, out there doing the live drafts, the FFPC. Give us a little taste. How you feeling? Are you recovered? And how pumped are you to get this show off today?
Oh, I'm always totally pumped. Coming back from Vegas, it's just it's the best weekend of the year, really. It's just so much fun. I drafted, I believe, 12 teams over 3.5 days. So pretty much drafting nonstop. All of them live drafts. 3 of them were auctions. I mean, and there's just nothing like being in that draft room with all the other people in your particular league. It's just so much fun. There's a lot, it's a lot looser, like you sit in a draft room run line and nobody says anything, and it's completely different than that at the live events. There's a little bit of trash talking going back and forth, just a whole lot of fun. You get to meet new people every year. I always meet several new people that I hadn't met before, lots of old friends. So, it's just a great time. Wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah, and I definitely miss being out there with you, Dan. I know we've drafted together down in Vegas, the FFPC. We've had some success with the main. I know our main this year is 1-0 after the first week, so that's a good start there with one of those big money leagues. I mean, there's a lot to digest from week one, as we know. There's some disappointments. You got victory laps happening already, Dan, after week one, which always makes me laugh. Some new regimes, when it comes to coaching staffs, OCs, all that kind of goodness. We're going to be going through all of that today. One thing you and I were talking about before we came on, and if you're watching right now, we want to give you actionable, valuable content when we do these shows. I mean, Dan and I are tag teaming it tonight. We're going to bring on some guests as the season unfolds, some of the biggest high stakes players, some of your favorite content creators and analysts. But we want to make sure that we're not listing off, players on the waiver wire for you to go get that are not available on your waiver wires. And that's one thing I find out there is, we play on the FFPC, we play in some big money leagues, we play in some dynasty leagues together. And the players we're going to talk about tonight are guys you guys can actually go out there and find in your waiver wire. They're guys you can go out and make trade offers for, or move on your rosters. So we're going to jump right into it, Dan. What's looking, as a whole, or even specific items, I guess, from the menu that was offered by the NFL this past weekend? What's maybe an observation that you noticed from this weekend?
Well, yeah, a couple of them. The first one is, of the 13 Sunday games, went over. So 11 out of 13 went under the total. 12 out of 16 on the entire week went under. That's pretty bad, but that's becoming a trend for the first week. That's something I've noticed over the past couple years happening as well. So I really think next year when I go out there, I'm just going to put, like an equal amount of money on every under for all 16 games, and I think I'm going to come out a winner. So that's kind of one thing I'm looking at. The other, and so it's no surprise that fantasy scoring was a little bit late this week. I mean, most leagues, if you got somewhere in the 130s, you probably won. And in a lot of weeks, in the FFPC or in FFC, something in the 130s is not necessarily going to get it done for you. So just a little bit later scoring. The other thing I noticed was a lot of the rookies really looked good straight out of the box. Whether you're talking about Emeka Buka or Ashton Genty, Bill Merritt, Travion Gibson, all those guys, and I can name more, Harold Fannin, Travis Hunter. They all looked good in one way or another. Like Travion Henderson didn't score a ton of points, but man, he looked electric out there. So, that's kind of what I'm looking for. What did you see with the slate, JD?
Yeah, I mean, talking about points, I was telling you before we came on, my highest scoring big gorilla, which had Lamar and Henry and Flowers stacked, scored 165, and I still lost to the Josh Allen owner. So, you're never safe. That's one thing I definitely learned. The other thing I learned, which is something I know, but I feel like we maybe forget every season, is NFL games, Dan, they're 4 quarters. They're not 1 quarter. It's not just a half. It's not just 3 quarters. And the Bills and the Vikings prove that to us in week 1. Why am I pointing this out? It might sound obvious, but I'm sure people watching those games were thinking, man, JJ McCarthy's just no good, or maybe they're thinking, wow, the Ravens are going to just crush the entire league by the time it was halftime. But we learned really quickly by the end of the game, as it unfolds, a lot of things happen, a lot of things change, and the outcome is not always what we think it was going to be at the beginning of the game. It's the same thing, Dan, in fantasy. Week 1 is week 1. There are 16 other weeks in most leagues. Obviously you've got playoff weeks and all that fun stuff, but in general, we're looking at a 17-week season. This is just week 1. So as much as we're going to talk about actionable targets, sell items, guys you want to go out there and get in waivers, just remember that there's a whole season left. It's a long season. Those victory laps I was talking about earlier, just make sure you don't get caught, taking one too early, because, these days social media, they lock you in pretty nicely on the X machine. Guys are bookmarking your takes and those laps. So just something I wanted to point out. The other thing I wanted to point out was the backfields. There were backfields, Dan, coming into the season. You talk about the rookies. The rookies were nice. We'll get deeper into that as we get into the show. But with regards to the backfields, some of the obscure, quote unquote, backfields that we had coming into the season got a little clearer. Like in Jacksonville, Etienne had a big game, 143 yards. He seems to be the man there. They shipped out Bigsby. You got Breece Hall put up over 100 yards. Allen did get a touchdown, stole a touchdown. But Breece is probably the guy you want at this point. Again, this could change as the season unfolds. Seattle, I'll admit it. You know me, Dan. I'll admit when I'm wrong. When I'm right, I'll rub it in a bit. Like, Tillman and Judy at the price. We'll get there later. But I was wrong so far with regards to Seattle. It looks like a committee. I mean, they didn't look that great running the ball altogether, but it does look like a committee. Denver, on the other hand, I know you were a big RJ Harvey guy, J.K. Dobbins. Both of those guys are looking valid right now in fantasy. And then in Washington, surprise, surprise, JCM looks like the guy right now. Eckler, who I thought, maybe he gives you like a CMC light type of season. Didn't really give you much fantasy points wise. And then on the other side of that, with the quarterbacks, I talked about Allen, I talked about Lamar. You've got Justin Fields, Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy. They kind of came out saying, we're legit quarterbacks. And in fantasy, we could give you QB1 weeks, minimum 22 points with those 5 quarterbacks. But then on the other side of that, you got like CJ Stroud, Bo Nix, Sam Darnold, Dak Prescott, Bryce Young, guys that are probably not feeling you warm and fuzzy as you set your lineups with them going into week 2. I know I've got one big gorilla where I waited, Dan, on those quarterbacks, and I'm deciding, do I want to play Bryce Young or CJ Stroud? It didn't really matter because neither of them look good after the first week. So we'll talk more individual players, but those are just some quick observations that I made, after the first week. Let's go and talk trade targets, Dan. We're talking dynasty. We're talking redraft today. Why don't you start it off, kick it off with your buy low?
Yeah, before we get into that, I just want to say, regarding JJ McCarthy and the Vikings, I thought early, the first half, it was basically the offensive line could not protect him, and he never had a chance to get anything going. And then they changed the protections after halftime. They started running more 12 personnel, and all of a sudden he had more time to throw. And then you saw what J.J. McCarthy could do. So hopefully those of you out there who are drafting, you've got your bags loaded up with some J.J. McCarthy for cheap, because I think he's going to be worth it. Really like what I'm seeing there. And, if getting into the trade targets, that kind of makes him a trade target, but I don't think you're sneaking up on anybody at this point. So I can't really call him a buy low. He's certainly not a sell high for me. He is a hang on for dear life, and I would even call him, kind of a, he's not low, but I'd still be buying just for that. But I do have one good buy low that you're going to absolutely hate to hear, JD. Are you ready for it?
Jerry Jeudy. Is that where you're going?
Even older and dustier.
Nice.
You know what? Go out there and buy yourself some Kareem Hunt, because Isaiah Pacheco just did not look good. Kareem Hunt was getting about half the work back there. You should be able to get Kareem Hunt for nearly nothing. And he could end up being a valuable contributor, in a flex role or something like that. If you have large leagues, large lineups, he fits. So I know it's ugly. I know it's gross. I called his name in draft rooms after that Kansas City game a couple times, and I felt dirty doing it, but I think it was the right move.
Well, one thing we talked about this offseason, Dan, if you guys were paying attention and tuning in, is how we thought KC would be throwing the ball more and how Mahomes might, produce more points by doing that. We thought obviously they'd have Rice and Worthy on the field at the same time, and maybe Royals kicks in. But for a different reason, the running game was just not happening. And Pacheco definitely did not look good. A lot of people thought coming off of last year when he came back off the injury, it was a broken leg, I believe it was, that it was, kind of normal, quote unquote, for him to be a little sluggish and not look like, the usual Pacheco. But if he rolls into this season and it looks like it did week 1, Pacheco owners are going to be worried for sure. And I think Hunt is probably the next guy in line at this point. They've got Brashad Smith there, but maybe a different type of back, not necessarily going to be the guy that's going to be getting the big volume. So I don't hate the Kareem Hunt buy low at this point, because how much is it going to cost you, right, Dan, for a Kareem Hunt, especially if he's on a roster that's maybe not competing or is deep at running back, and they're probably more willing to, or maybe you make a move and you get him thrown in, is a way to do it with a guy like Kareem Hunt. I'm going to go a bit bigger, Dan. And this time of year, especially the first 3-4 weeks of the year, I like to go after bigger pieces that have not performed up to par, especially the first week. And for me, we don't have to look too far. Everybody saw it on Thursday night. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, basically getting you low single digits, for your fantasy scores. And there's always, Dan, the one or two owners in your league that get finicky with their players, especially their top players, when they see those low scores. Maybe they didn't get a chance to, watch the whole game. They don't know the whole story, but just put some feelers out for these guys. Hurts and Barkley were basically that offense with some Goddard sprinkled in there on Thursday night. But I feel like a big bounce back is coming back for sure, especially AJB. He was coming off an injury. He hadn't practiced much with the team coming into the game. It seemed like he was more of a decoy. So I think if you can get anything right now packaged together and go out there, just like I said, put some feelers out. You never know what you can get. Dan, give us your first sell high in this segment.
Yeah, I would sell Jaden Reed coming off that touchdown. This is a guy who's apparently dealing with a Jones fracture in his foot. He's really not on the field that much because they run a lot of 12 personnel in Green Bay, and when they run 12 personnel, Jaden Reed is standing on the sidelines. So, there's a lot of wide receivers in this room anyway, so it's tough to see how you can really count on him week to week. So if you can find anybody who is really high on Jaden Reed and they remember, oh yeah, that his rookie year he looked really good, that's the person you want to sell to. Just get out there and make that move right now. If you get decent value for him, I think you're gonna be very, very happy.
Yeah, I like that as a sell. Mine might not be the most popular take. I don't know how people are feeling about Quentin Johnson of the Chargers. Again, kind of looking at those early games, he seems to be the wide receiver 3 on the team. He's coming off of 2 touchdowns, ran 36 routes, 7 targets, and 79 yards. I don't know, Dan. Correct me if I'm wrong. Could be his best production of the season. I know last year in week 2, he gave you 22 points against Carolina. He had about 3 or 4 more spike weeks throughout the season, but there's a lot more target competition this year with Ladd there. Keenan Allen coming back. Keenan Allen came in August, so he's got that rapport already with Herbert, and you could tell Herbert is really comfortable with him. So if they get the running game in order and the running game gets a bit more part of that passing game, they've got they've got 2 or 3 tight ends that were mixed in to that receiving game. So I just think that it's going to be hard for QJ to give you that production on a weekly basis. So if you can sell him at this point, you have enough depth at the position on your bench. I think he could be a nice piece to move after a big week 1 out there with the Chargers. What do you think about that, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. I think you got to kind of temper your expectations of what you can get because he's one of those reputation in the league already and within fantasy circles. And, but if you're looking to move him, it's hard to find a better time than right now based off that game.
So let's go to buy low number 2. What are you going to give us, Dan?
All right. Let's go with Mason Taylor, tight end for the Jets. I thought, even though he only got 1 target, he was very, very involved in the game. He had 21 routes on 25 total dropbacks. And Jeremy Ruckert, who had 2 targets, only had 6 routes on those same 25 dropbacks. So, obviously Mason Taylor is running over 3 times as many routes as Ruckert in this first game. So I think that it's just a matter of time until he starts to become more and more a part of this pass game. This is a player that they drafted high. He's got NFL bloodlines, with Jason Taylor as his dad. So he understands what's required to make it as a pro. So I think, the wheels are definitely up on Mason Taylor. I'd be looking to get him before all of a sudden starts showing out a little bit like Harold Fannin did.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Mason Taylor was one of our favorites coming in. Even before the draft, he was one of our favorites, him and Loveland and landing in New York. We talk about narrow target trees. He had that big catch, I think it was in the 4th quarter, so came later in the game. But I think as the season goes, he's quickly going to become a favorite target out there. I know they love him in New York from the sounds of it. So I love that as a big buy. I feel like but most rookies that you were high on coming into the season that haven't necessarily performed week 1, you can go out and at least put some feelers out there, and Mason is definitely a good one to target. I'm going to go back to maybe similar to my first buy low, but the Bengals passing game, Dan, this is what we think as a high powered passing offense. And that's not necessarily what they got. They're on the road, divisional rival in Cleveland. It was a tougher game for them. You've got Burrow, Higgins, Chase, all three of them. I mean, T was 3 for 33. Chase was 2 for 26. Burrow only 113 yards with a touchdown. So again, maybe you're thinking there's no way anyone's going to trade me, Jamar Chase but if you get creative, put the right pieces together. I talked about Quentin Johnson. Maybe you add him to a first and another piece that popped this weekend, and you go out and make an offer for T Higgins or something like that. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but as long as you go out there and you're active, you're putting out feelers, you never know what's going to come back. Maybe the counter is something where you're like, wow, I'll still send that for, T Higgins. Or maybe you want an upgrade at quarterback. You want to get yourself a little Joe Burrow. These are very small windows, Dan, throughout the season in Dynasty that allow you to go after players that are not normally on the market. That's kind of how I see it. You might get rejected everywhere, and that's fine. But at least you took a swing and you tried to go out there and get yourself an upgrade at one of those positions. So let's go sell high here. I'm going to go, this is with a caveat, Dan. I'm going to go Javonte Williams. And for me, if you're in a redo mode, as we like to say here in the GOAT district, or in a rebuild, maybe you try to move him for a first. Maybe you try to move him for like a Caleb Johnson, someone that you don't necessarily need production from this year. I know I'm in a triflex where I'm not necessarily competing this year. I do have Javonte Williams. I wasn't able to move him all off season. Now he's put up, I think he put up 20 points, 20 fantasy points, if I'm not mistaken, in that range. So there's not much competition. Anyways, Jaden Blue is not even on the field right now. It sounds like he's going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Healthy scratch for week 2. Last I saw, or did you see something different?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Nope. It sounds like that's the way he's trending.
So don't get me wrong. He's definitely seems like he's the guy in Dallas for now. He's dealt with injuries in the past. We saw him in Denver. My thing with him, Dan, is last year he had the opportunity in Denver and he just didn't make it happen. So while he's hot, I think like I said, if you're in a rebuild mode, if you need him and you need to put a starter in at running back and you're competing this year, obviously don't go out there and move him unless you're looking to upgrade or do something like that. But I think that for those reno mode rebuild teams, now would be a good time to go and try to move Javonte Williams off the nice shine from week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. There's never enough starting running backs to go around for 50 teams. Everybody's always looking for a starter. So if you've got one that you're willing to move, you're going to get a good price for him during the season. And I think for my sell high, I'm going to go with Dalton Kincaid. He had 32 routes on 52 dropbacks and 4 targets. That's not great on 52 dropbacks. Basically, he was splitting time with Knox, and with the Bills tight, when you've got 52 dropbacks and you only get 32 routes, 4 targets. Now he was lucky enough to catch every target, and he got the TD. So he got basically as much production as he possibly could out of, the 4 targets that he got. So now is really the time to sell him, because you know what? This passing game is, the tree here has a lot of branches. We've got Kincaid, we've got Knox, we've got Keon Coleman, we've got Khalil Shakir, we've got Palmer, we've got the running backs, Cook and Ty Johnson getting passes. We've even got Moore in there getting the occasional pass. So there's a lot going on there, and you can see from the graphic that JD just put up how many Buffalo receivers were involved in the passing game. And I don't think that's really going to change for Kincaid. So now is a great time to sell him. He's a name that people still like. They still have good feelings about him and all that. So with it coming off a good performance, now is the time to sell.
Yeah, I like that. Definitely spreading the ball over there in Buffalo. Let's look at maybe some buys and sell, maybe one or two that we haven't talked about, Dan. I'm going to start with a couple receivers as sells, and then I'm going to go a couple running backs as buys. So I've got Deebo Samuel and Hollywood Brown. Again, with a caveat, if you're rebuilding or you're in renewal mode, I think right now is a good time to sell Deebo. We saw good usage of him, got a touchdown, looked good out there in Washington. Again, if you're competing, there's no need to necessarily, I would just ride it out with a guy like Deebo Samuel. They brought him in for a reason. However, coming off of the offseason, people were saying he's too fat or he's, too old and all that goodness. You've got something now that people can look at, get excited about the fantasy points that he put up. So now would be a good time to move him. And Hollywood Brown, there's no one else in KC. I remember, Dan, early in the offseason, I was pounding Hollywood Browns in those best balls just because you were hearing Patrick Mahomes was pounding the table to get him back in KC. There was a couple other teams that were out there trying to get him. He had been dealing with a lot of injuries. So the fact that he does deal with injuries often enough. Right now, he's kind of the only target out there in KC. We talked about how bad the running game was in the first week. So if you need starters, you don't have the depth at position, of course, you're going to ride these guys. If you do have the depth, or these are guys way down the depth chart on your rosters, they're good guys to move. And then I'm going to go to a couple running backs to buy. Bashal Tutin in Jacksonville. We saw Bigsby get shipped out. We saw Etienne get the bulk of the volume there. And then Caleb Johnson, one carry, didn't look good in Pittsburgh. Maybe, like for me, Dan, a lot of these, like Caleb Johnson, when I drafted him, same with Tutin, I wasn't drafting them to start them week one. You know what I mean? Like they were guys that I was thinking probably in the second half of the season or in the back third of the season is when they'll be able to help me. So I think right now is a good time to go buy them if, they're on an owner's team that maybe is competing. Maybe they're looking for, again, I talked about a team where I'm not competing. I've got Javonte Williams. Maybe I take Javonte Williams and I try to get, a Tutin or a Caleb Johnson back, expecting them to produce for me down the road.
Yep, definitely makes sense to try to buy those running backs who haven't hit yet. So I like that a lot. Kind of my best pick, I think, is going to be a guy who is George Pickens. We definitely
where's
like
my
to see
drum,
a guy
Dan?
like, yeah,
there it is.
Exactly. We like to see a guy come onto a new team, get a ton of targets, and make a big splash. And Pickens definitely didn't do that. Everybody had really amped up expectations, and now all of a sudden people were going, crap, he's the wide receiver too behind CeeDee Lamb, and Dak didn't look good again, and Dak sucked last year, and all this kind of stuff. And you know what? I don't think that there's anything broken with the original thesis that says, hey, here's an exciting doing a lot of passing with a quarterback be pretty good. So I'm in on buying George Pickens if you can find the window based off that bad game. I think now is the time to do it.
Yeah, I like the Pickens pickup for sure. You got to think big things are ahead for the passing game for Dak and his new weapon in George Pickens. Let's go waiver wire, Dan. We talked about coming into the show how we want to make sure we give our audience actionable players that they can go out and find on their waiver wires. I know all the ones that I'm going to mention tonight. I literally went in, and whether it was FFPC, Sleeper, any of the platforms I was on, and just made sure that they were available, on the waiver wires in most of those leagues. So why don't you kick us off with your first must-have ad of the evening?
Yeah, for a must-have, I think, especially if you're playing in any sort of tight end premium, it's Juwan Johnson. He's very lightly owned, even in FFPC, where you've got 20-man rosters and 12 teams per league. So we're rostering 240 players, and he's still out there in the majority of leagues. And you know what? He looks like he's a big part of this passing offense, and they're going to be behind and having to pass often. He's kind of the easy check down safety blanket. Chris Olave has shown to be relatively injury prone during his time in the NFL. Rashid Shaheed also has had some issues with injuries and so forth. Juwan Johnson is just a great cog. So I'm prioritizing him pretty much everyone, including Harold Fannin, or the backup tight end in San Francisco, Tonga. Any of those guys. I think Johnson is probably the guy who's going to be producing all year.
Did you say Juwan Johnson as your first ad, Dan?
I did.
This is why I can't let you go before me. This is definitely why I can't let you go before me, Dan. I'll just go on to my second one, because that's who my first one is. I know, just to kind of add to what you said, like the Saints and the Colts were two offenses that Mason Spain and I were doing a draft together, and we identified as two offenses that will probably outperform what people's expectations are this year for fantasy, not necessarily for football. And I think they both showed this week, the Saints were one catch away from making that a tie game there against Arizona. Rattler looked decent, like he's able to to support some offensive weapons. And then of course we saw the Colts. I mean, they're playing one of the worst probably teams in the NFL right now in the Dolphins, but at the same time, I think that Juwan Johnson, I know you've liked him for years and he's shown flashes, but he's always had Taysom Hill there kind of capping his upside, in New Orleans. So I definitely like what we saw from him this week, and moving forward, I think we could see the quarterbacks leaning on him. I'll go to my second guy then. I'll go to Keyshawn Butte. I know he's a guy that you like picking up off waivers going into the season. He's a guy that I love drafting as my last pick in a lot of my best ball teams, especially if I had Drake May. He was second in targets, reception, and yards last season amongst receivers. And as towards the back end of the season, he seemed to be one of Drake May's favorite targets. I know he's a sixth-round draft pick in 2023, but that was mainly due to, and I was trying to look this up really quickly before we came on. You might have a better memory than I do, but I know he was dealing with an ankle injury in 2021. In that season, he was having a fantastic season. But when he came back, he had trouble, I believe, building rapport with Jaden Daniels, and that kind of threw him down the draft board when it came to the NFL draft. But I mean, week one, he led all receivers with 8 targets, tied only Diggs with 6 receptions, and led the team with 106 yards. Could he disappear as the season unfolds, Dan? He could. But right now, he seems to be Drake May's favorite target. And this is an open offense right now. You talked about Henderson, how good he looked. But on the receiving side of things, I think most people had Pop Douglas or Stephon Diggs as the guys in the receiving game in that offense. So Butte's definitely a guy you guys can go out there and find on your waivers who can help you starting even next week.
And this, JD, is why I can't let you go before me.
I knew this was going to happen. But hey, look, man, if we're both going for then it means it's a good ad.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you got to make the booty call here because he is such a huge part of this offense, as you mentioned.
I had to get the air horn out.
He's the X receiver there. Kyle Williams looks miles behind him right now, and that's basically his competition for that X receiver job. You could see Stephon Diggs, as the Z picking up a little bit more of the load as the season moves on and he gets a little more healthy. I think Pop Douglas is Pop Douglas. He's a guy who can help move the chains, but he's not going to really move the needle for fantasy that much. But Butte is he's a guy that just kind of keeps looking better and better. And you know what? He was a super big recruit coming into LSU, and he did super well. I mean, he was he basically was their top receiver his freshman year, despite all the receiver competition that he had. So I really like what he did. He had a couple tough years. He had some character concerns. That's why he did not get drafted high. And, I think the Patriots got a steal there. So love that one.
All right, give us your next must-have ad off the waiver wire.
All right, I'm going to give you one at running back, and I don't. This one is not as much of a must-have. This is Kenny Gainwell, as JD knows, a favorite of mine for many years. But he was actually out snapping and almost out touched Jaylen Warren in Pittsburgh on week 1. We had heard whispers that Gainwell was going to be involved. Basically was the way I heard it phrased before week 1. I did not expect involved to mean, basically almost 50% of the opportunities there. And that's what we saw. So it looks like Jaylen Warren has kind of moved over, and he's kind of got the old Najee Harris role, and Kenny Gainwell is in the Jaylen Warren role. So as we know, that's a fairly valuable role. It's, I think these guys each cap the upside of the other, and then the fact that you've got Caleb Johnson waiting in the wings also, is a reason to kind of keep the price down on what I'm going to spend on Gainwell. But I think Gainwell is a guy who will be able to help me early in the season on teams where I'm struggling a little bit at running back. So I don't mind putting out a little bit of fab budget to procure his services.
Funny, because I had Gainwell as not necessarily an avoid, but more like a caution with regards to, how it is, Dan, this time of year, it's easy that people get carried away with how much they're going to spend on a player. I definitely think Gainwell can be a player that adds depth. And you talked about earlier when I was talking about running backs, like it's hard to find running backs off waivers this time of year. So he's definitely a guy that you should go out and try to get on your waiver wire, off of your waiver wire in your leagues. I would put lower bids on him. I'm not necessarily trying to bid a big significant or put a big significant amount on him. And that's kind of why I had him under that category as a player, not necessarily to avoid, but just to be cautious with, because the thing is, when you have to start these guys every week, unless there's an injury in Pittsburgh, it seems like it's going to be, kind of a rotated 3-headed monster. And we don't know how long till Caleb Johnson becomes more a part of this, significant part of this offense, I guess. He did have a fumble in week 1, but I do think he's a guy that you can stash on your bench. And he's definitely a guy that you have to be aware of on your waiver wire in your leagues right now. I'm going to stay in Pittsburgh, Dan, but I'm going to go to the receiver position. Calvin Austin was a guy I was trying to add going into week 1 on waivers, trying to get him on the cheap. And he seems to be the wide receiver 2 right now after week 1 for Aaron Rodgers. Ran 29 routes, was 4 for 6 targets with 70 yards and a touchdown. Seems like the number 1 deep target for Aaron Rodgers. And if Rodgers he looked rejuvenated in week 1, especially playing a Jets team where he didn't have the best season. He just looked like a guy that doesn't want to go out, I guess the way he was going out before we saw him in that Steelers uniform. So I like getting Calvin Austin out of my team right now off of waivers. He's a nice flex play, I think, like a good bye week fill-in that you can put in. And if you do deal with injuries, we talked about, we'll talk about guys later on that are dealing with injuries, but I think he's definitely a guy that you need to pay attention and try to get off of your waiver wires this week is Calvin Austin.
Yep, like that. I'll throw out there a running back. The one we didn't expect to be the backup in Las Vegas, and that's Samir White. And again, this is very, very much just a handcuff, or if it's, if you don't have Genty, then he's just basically a scratch-off lottery ticket for the back of your bench. But he's one that's very lightly owned right now and probably isn't going to cost you a lot to go out and get. So those are the players I like tacking onto the back end of my roster if I've got an extra spot or two to burn.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Mostert was a guy I liked coming into the season just because it seemed like he was the only guy behind GNT, and then I believe he was a healthy scratch as well going into that game against New England. So Zamir White, whether you have GNT or not, definitely a guy you need to pay attention to and add as a depth piece on your running back squad. Deeper stash, I'm going to go to a guy you like, Dan. I know you put up some dollars on one of our teams. I don't remember which team it was where you picked him up, if it was a Big Gorilla or Dynasty, but Isaac Tesla, the catch radius that guy showed on that last touchdown in the game against Green Bay was just insane. And I know Detroit, this is a guy they really like. They traded up to get him. He's a local guy. And the way I see it, Dan, is if that offense, I mean, look, it's week 1. We don't want to overreact. Obviously, that defense in Green Bay is looking dominant, especially with Micah Parsons now added to the roster. But let's say this offense just doesn't get it together necessarily in the first 2-3 weeks. They're going to look to shuffle things around and to try to make things happen and spark this offense. And Tesla is definitely a guy who they could turn to maybe sooner than we expected, or maybe you expected him to become significant quicker because you seem to be trying to get him in early. But for a deeper stash, I think Isaac Tesla, he is out there in a couple leagues. If you see him on the waiver wire, I think you can add him to your receiving core.
Yeah, most definitely. I think it's a great ad. He probably would have played more on Sunday, but he was sick in the week leading up to the game, and so they only had him out there for a couple snaps. But that was one of the things that Dan Campbell was saying in his press conference afterwards was, we'd like to get him out there more. So I like that pick. Another deeper stash for me, and this is going to be, I guess, kind of more of a theme rather than a person, but I'm out there looking at who got dropped in the first waiver run and seeing if anybody has made any mistakes on players they dropped and shouldn't have. I'm looking for running backs that are, that were at least somewhat involved in the first week. I mean, it doesn't even need to be that much involvement, but like Kyle Manangi, Woody Marks, players like that, the ones I'm going to prioritize over, like a Keaton Mitchell or a Jarquez Hunter who are totally inactive. But I'm looking for those, those running backs to add on to the back end, that maybe got dropped and shouldn't have been, might be a wide receiver that got dropped and shouldn't have been, whatever it is. But I think it's always good to look through that drop list because sometimes they don't pop way up, if you're trying to sort by fantasy points scored in week 1. You might miss them, but if you look at the drop list of players that were let go in the last waiver run, then you're going to catch them. And those are sometimes guys you can get for real cheap, put on the back end of your roster.
Dan, I love that. I have a little 2014 Football Guys FFPC medallion because I picked up Odell Beckham Jr., who was dropped. I forget which week it was, one of the first weeks that season. Put him on the back of my bench, and he helped me at least win my 12-man league and took me into the money. I finished top 25, I think, that year, whatever it was in the tournament. But that was definitely a big part of it was, and I think that's key. What you just said is look to see who I like to go through. Like I know in the FFPC, when you go into the league, you can actually look at the waiver wire report, and you can go through and see exactly who was dropped, who was picked up. And I like to comb through those as well, just to kind of get a feel for guys that I want to maybe target the following week. So I definitely love that tip. All right, let's go to week 2, Dan. Let's take a look at these week 2 games. What's a key matchup? We might have the same one on this one, which, the way the show's gone, I wouldn't be surprised, but let's talk it out here. What's your key? I think I'm supposed to go first here, but I've already offered it to you. So now I can't take it back. So you go first, Dan. What's the key matchup you're looking at for week 2?
All right. I don't know if you got this one or not, but I think the Bills at the Jets could be a huge shootout. We just saw what the Bills were able to do offensively. The Bills could not stop the run, and Lamar gave them fits. And the Jets have kind of a similar situation. They've got they've got a stable of running backs instead of Derrick Henry, but they've got a very good running quarterback who can also throw the ball reasonably well in Justin Fields. And with as much trouble as the Bills had, I think the Jets can give them nearly as much trouble. And so I think this is going to be one of the bigger scoring games of the week. It's probably, I haven't looked at the Vegas odds, but I'm guessing that it's probably one of the lower totals, and or at best, just kind of average. But it's my pick to go with the highest.
No, it's up there. I mean, the highest is the game that actually, the game I'm going to talk about was the highest, but now it's actually the second highest. Yours is kind of tied with a couple other ones as the third highest at 46.5 right now for the Bills and the Jets at the Jets. So I definitely like that call. The thing that's fun this year is you look at some of these matchups, and in previous years, those games maybe were not as appealing, but now it's like after week one, we're just licking our chops to see some of these games, like the Jets now are going to be so fun to watch. I know you and I were high on Justin Fields coming into the season. I know Snowman, who I drafted with a lot this offseason, he would have walked out of every single draft with Justin Fields. He was getting on a plane today just telling me, I told you, Justin Fields. But, like I like to remind him, it's a long season. I don't want the same guy on 100% of my teams, but Justin Fields looks like he's definitely going to be fun this year. And a couple teams that look like they're going to be fun this Thursday night, Washington at Green Bay, a 48.5 over-under. So the second highest over-under going into this week so far. We just saw Green Bay dominate Detroit at home in week 1, 27-13. Jordan Love is looking healthy, spreading the ball around nicely. I mean, pretty sure I just saw Watson either got signed or got an extension in Green Bay. Like he wasn't spreading the ball enough. That's what it was. So an extension for Watson. The defense is, like I talked about, Micah Parsons, and that defense looks solid in the green and gold. And Washington just continuing where they left off, whether it's Jane Daniels, the defense, 21-6 against the Giants. I thought the Giants might give them a bit more of a run in that week 1 game, being a divisional rival, and, us thinking the Giants might maybe go into the season improve, but we'll see what happens there in New York as the season unfolds. Now they have Debo, they've got JCM, who looks legit and looks like he might be the guy in that backfield. JD's not showing any signs necessarily of a sophomore slump to this point. I think this even in week 2, Dan, this can be a significant NFC game when you think about it, because these are two teams that could be battling out for the championship, the NFC championship. I was going to say January, but I guess, is it January or February now? I don't even know. I know that the Super Bowl's now in February. I guess it'd be January, right?
It's still January for the championship games. But they definitely could be. And it'll be an interesting game because, the things that I think might hold it down are the fact it's on Thursday night, which sometimes we see lower scoring games on Thursday night, but not always. And these are two much improved defenses, but these are also two very good offenses. So, I have no idea which way this game is going to go. I do think it's going to be a fun game to watch no matter what. So I'm definitely into it for that reason. And I'm certainly not sitting any players from this game, because I think, the defense is going to take them out. I'm playing anybody that I would normally play for sure.
Well, look at that Pittsburgh-New York game, Dan. You would have. I know that just having the Jets defense on some teams just killed me. That game just ended up being more of a scoring match than I think a lot of people expected with how good those defenses were coming into the season.
Yeah, 100%. That was kind of a funny story too, because I picked when I was making my picks and putting down some bets in Vegas, I went up to the window and I rattled off all my bets, and the guy's printing the slips for me, and I'm kind of in a little bit of a hurry, so I'm checking the slips, and Jets, Steelers, and Broncos, and just checking all my slips, And I ran out of there, and I'd bet the under on Jets Steelers. And, so anyway, the game starts going, and it's like by halftime, they're practically already over the total, and so end of the day, I'm sorting through my slips, pulling the winners out, and I was about to throw that slip out, and all of a sudden I looked at it and I realized that guy gave me the wrong thing. He gave me the over on the game instead of the under.
Only Dan with the horseshoe.
And I was looking so quick, I didn't catch that it was the over myself. Otherwise, I would have stopped him on the spot and made him redo the ticket for me. So anyway, I ended up cashing a ticket that I had no business cashing.
Man, that is lucky. I mean, who else does that happen to, Dan? Come on. I love it. I love your
I don't know.
stories.
I mean, there's a little bit of an idiot factor going on there with me, and there's, definitely a big luck factor, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
All right, let's talk injuries for going into week 2. Unfortunately, I mean, there were some big ones. I know you and I were really, I think most people were high on Kittle, but you and I were making a point of drafting him on some of our bigger teams. So it sucks that he's out for 4 weeks now, going on the IR. Juwan Jennings, also with the 49ers, he's avoided a serious shoulder injury, and he's more day-to-day. I've got a couple more here to list off. I mean, it sounds like Brock Bowers is fine. He was initially, there was some worry about his injury. Drake London seems like he's day-to-day. And then the last one I had written on here, and you can add any to them that I'm missing here, was Evan Ingram with a calf injury. From what I understand, if it's an actual strain, it'll be longer. It'll be like 2 to 4 weeks, but we'll wait to see further updates on his injury. Any I'm missing here, Dan?
I think those are the major ones. I suspect that Ingram will be out, and his usage during that first game wasn't as exciting as I was hoping it would be. So, well,
especially where he was going, Dan, in drafts, it's disappointing.
Right, exactly. So, that's a player, if he's on my roster, I'm very concerned about, and I'm definitely going to be looking hard to make sure I've got a backup plan, not only for any amount of time that he misses injured, but also I just may have to, be trying to find somebody who I can put in my lineups even after he comes back, because I'm not sure if he's going to be really helping me out that much. Brock Bowers and Drake London, I guess I would just say on that, even though they're day-to-day, don't assume they're playing, because a lot of times those day-to-day injuries end up being a 1-week absence. And we know Pete Carroll is like Mr. overly optimistic when it comes to any injury at all. So, and Bowers was down playing, and I know all that kind of stuff. But I'll tell you what, I've got Brock Bowers on some teams, and I am definitely going to make sure that I have a good pivot going into the week. Same thing for Drake London. I want to make sure I have a good pivot for him as well.
Yeah, especially if you took Bowers in that first round, a lot of times, you might neglect the depth at that position just in your drafts based on roster construction. I know with Ingram, shout out to Abib Agbatoba. Look at that. Just nailed it, Dan, right off tip of my tongue there. He had that gut feeling about Ingram. And look, I know it's week 1, but I had that gut feeling, and then it got to a point closer to the season. I was like, I got to have some shares of this guy, and now it's like you look at those teams and you're like, should have stuck to my gut. He was going at a pretty pricey spot in the drafts. Let's look at some lineup decisions that we might have going into the week. Dan, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, I really just threw out one. I haven't even started to look at lineups very much yet, because I'm still more focused on just kind of going through the aftermath of week 1 and working on getting waivers ready for this week. But I know one spot I'm going to have Devonta Smith and George Pickens, and I'm only going to be starting one of them. So that's going to be a fun one to try to figure out.
It's funny. I had the first one I have listed is Chris Olave and Devonta Smith, because you've got Olave versus the 49ers, so a tougher matchup, but he's coming off of 13 targets. And then Smith coming off 3 targets versus Dallas, but he's playing KC, who just gave up, tons of fantasy points to the Chargers. So that's definitely one. I've got us making a decision between Keyshawn Butte and Zach Charbonnet in the flex spot in our main, which is now 1-0. And then one that I had to make this week, which I'm not looking forward to in week 2, Dan, is, as I mentioned, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud in my QB spot. Oh man, I'm loving my elite
time to go
quarterback
pick up some
teams
Daniel
right now.
Jones.
Yeah, totally. And Daniel Jones is another one, Dan, where as we go through the weeks, you kind of kick yourself thinking, I wish I leaned more into my gut takes and how I felt about it. And Daniel Jones was a guy, like, I just felt like if he gets a start with the weapons and Steichen, right?
Steichen,
Colts. Yeah, Steichen. I feel like the excitement for Steichen, like a couple of years ago when he was in Indy and when they brought in AR, was like huge. But then AR really kind of like muddied the waters, I guess, with the Colts offense. But I always thought, like, Daniel Jones coming into a better situation, he has the legs. I mean, he could be a decent fantasy producer. And I don't want to get too excited about the Colts offense because they did play Miami and it seems like they're a disaster. I mean, now Tyreek Hill probably ends up in KC or something like that. Like, if he's not in jail before later on in the season, because now it seems like there's some domestic issues with him. But excited to. I mean, you know what? It's fun though that we have guys like DJ and guys available on waivers that you can go out and grab. Like even Rodgers was a guy I was going to add in our waiver wire segment just because. I mean, 4 touchdowns his first week against the Jets. So if you're quarterback needy, like I clearly will be in that one big gorilla, you definitely have options out there. And what's your bold call, Dan, for week 2?
I'm going to say Detroit is going to hang a 40 burger on the Bears in Detroit.
Damn. I like that.
I think Detroit wants to wash the taste of week 1 out of their mouth. I think the Bears want to wash the taste of week 1 out of their mouth too. But I think Detroit's going to get it done and the Bears are not.
I like it because you got to think a team like Detroit is going to not like walking out of Green Bay with, I know it was a division rival, all that goodness, but I'm sure Dan Campbell and the Lions want to bounce back from that. And I could definitely see that happening. I'm going to go back to, we talked about Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. I think that they're going to be 2 of the most productive wide receivers this week as they go to KC. We saw KC give up a lot of points to the receivers, to the Chargers. I think that Hurts and his 2 stud receivers are going to have a field day out there in KC. KC's defense just not looking, I mean, again, it's week 1, but they're just not looking as dominant, I guess you could say, as in previous years. We'll see if that changes, but I think the Philly receivers could be something good in week 2 and maybe at the top of the rankings when it comes to production. So Dan, you'll be happy to know we are at the 59-minute mark. We finally stuck to our time schedule. We want to make these a little shorter. We don't need to go an hour and a half, 2 hours. When we bring on some guests, we might have a little leeway there. We'll try to make it as compact as possible, but we want to make sure we hit, again, on some actionable points for you guys. Let us know in the comments if you like the format of the show, if there's anything that's missing in the show that you need for your weekly preparation. We want to make sure that we're helping you out week to week. We're going to be doing these every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. So appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate you guys watching all off season. We appreciate all the support you guys have given us. And we'll be here every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, Dan and myself. And make sure you subscribe, smash that like button. Dan, anything else to add as we walk this one out?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, just get out there, work that waiver wire this week, and let's make week 2 a good one.
Yeah, work that waiver wire. Good luck week 2. Make sure you're following Dan and myself on the X Machine, at Draft Room Baller, at Overhyped Sleeper, no E on the end. And we will check you all later.
district, you know the Pope listens. Dynasty, our religion, for the blokes missing. On all of these trades, on all of these plays, on all of these grades. By the end of the day, y'all getting played. So, what you gonna do next? Try to fill up that flex? Send the homie a text? That trash offer's the best? You try to make it complex, then they text you back, now all of a sudden they don't make any sense? Broaden your horizons, boy. Dynasty's not for the Simons, boy. These trades not for consignment, boy. Respect your opponent, y'all some piranhas, boy. This my advice, from me to you. Open up your cute little podcast queue. Search up GOAT District, my dude. Pop it in your ear, man, y'all know what to do. It's the... And I always be traded. And I always be traded. And I always be trading. Y'all try to betray them, but first you gotta bait them.